All right, so in the last video, I talked about how this whole thing around Shabbat Shalom with Charlie Kirk, how Charlie was, according to Erica, his wife, coming home, towards the end there, he was coming home and throwing his phone and his key, all the distractions into the drawer on Friday evening and saying Shabbat Shalom. And a big part of the alternative media that are, that consider themselves Christian media or people, they were saying, oh, this is clearly a part of the whole thing here. She's trying to make it like he's still very much in support of Judaism and the Jews, and when clearly there might be something else going on here, And so if you're not familiar with Candace Owens and all these people that have been talking about this, this whole thing about the Shabbat Shalom was a big joke for a long time. But in that last video, I talked about how that actually ties in to something that I was a part of back in the 2009 time frame, and it was a big movement. And I know it was growing, and it was pretty big. And I see something that's taking place that's very interesting around this. Because like in that video, I discussed that we are in another identity crisis here. That's how that ties into a bigger picture, a bigger story. Because around the Charlie Kirk event, there is a lot of discussions taking place on alternative media. And those discussions are around how Charlie was clearly pulling away from the Israel cause. Because leading up to that, he was a supporter of the Zionist movement. The Judeo-Christian values and this whole thing. And so, because of him pulling away from that, a lot of people believe that ties into what actually happened with him. And that's not what I'm here to get into today. I have my own beliefs around that, and I do think that we were fed a narrative that's not the truth. Clearly, I think that it's obvious that it wasn't the truth. But we're not here to discuss what happened. I'm here to discuss Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. That's what we're here to talk about. Because I think there's something interesting going on. Because what ends up happening is this whole movement of Christians around this and it's a big one, I'm telling you, and most of them, from what I've seen, are Catholics. Candace Owens, Baron Coleman, these are all Catholic Christians. If that's even, I don't know if that's a contradiction of terms, it should be, I don't know. But that's what's happening. And these people are mocking the fact that he was saying Shabbat Shalom, when in fact, in reality, he could have been coming into the truth of what the scriptures actually say. When you do, you start to dig back in deeper and deeper into the Hebraic roots of the faith, which is the origins and where the truth and the meat of the matter is found. And so for surface level Christianity, people who only follow the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, who have disconnected it from the front half of the book, well, they've taken the context away from everything, of all the meaning, of all the fulfillments, of what it actually means and how it all ties together. And they've made their own interpretations because of this lack of contextual information. And then what you end up having as a result of that is all these different denominations, which, again, back then in 2009, there was like 44,000. All different denominations, each one having its own different little philosophy and its own dogma around one different little scripture that they have their own interpretation of, their own idea of what it means. And so they start their own church and boom, there you have another denomination. And this has been going on for a long time, obviously. But what we need to understand is there is a truth found in that book, and that truth is not a truth that should divide. Certainly not fracture and splinter into 44,000 different pieces. Because that's the reality. They all come from one source, that book that we call the Bible. And so this is a very interesting topic, and it's very relevant today, because if you haven't noticed, there are going on that has to do with that tribe of people that we see in the scriptures, the people that God chose to make his covenant with, the people of Israel. And it's becoming like, this is so crazy because I don't even know where this line gets drawn now to where you can and can't talk about this topic. And that's crazy. That's the point I'm trying to make. The bigger picture here is that the truth will ultimately be suppressed through this false guise of anti-Semitism. That's what's ultimately going to happen here. And that's a big deal. That's the biggest deal in all of this. Because now, just underneath that, the biggest part of this is this whole idea where Christians, a big body of Christians, are mocking people for saying Shabbat Shalom. And I'm sure that if you were somebody who said, oh, I keep the Sabbath, well, you're a Jew. And this was happening back then when I entered into that. Oh, you're a Pharisee. You're keepers of the law. You guys are Pharisees. This all comes from an ignorance, a clear ignorance of not understanding the scriptures. But that's what I've seen it happen. I've seen it happening here, and it's growing and growing in power. Because now, for anybody who would say Shabbat Shalom, which is something common that we would say, coming into the Hebraic roots of your faith, Shabbat Shalom, because they associate Hebrew with Israel, when in fact it was Hebrew, the Hebrew people, that were the ones who crossed over into covenant with God and followed the way. It was their language. And so now to speak it, you're a Jew or someone keeping Judaism or supporting Israel or all these different things now. You get a label slapped on you. And that's the label. And so I know that this is probably a hard thing to understand what I'm saying if you're not familiar with this at all, but trust me here. This is a big deal. And the bigger deal, even than that, is that there is an identity crisis taking place. And that is that people do not know who's who and who they are. And there's all this talk about the chosen people and how that's, it's racist. It's racist to say that you're the chosen people. It's the most racist thing you could say. That's what people are saying about Israel. And I'm not here to tell you that is that chosen people. What I'm here to tell you is that if you are a follower of the God of that book, and you have entered in to covenant with the God of that book, that you are Israel. Clearly stated in the new covenant. You are Israel. But that doesn't change anything. I know that that's what even the Catholic Church thinks, but they think a lot of other things too that are false. You need to understand that you are Israel. And so if you are Israel, well then who is that over there? Well, they're also talked about in that book. And we're not going to talk about it here because I want this to see the light of day, but I can assure you they are mentioned. And there's a good chance that the leadership and what's actually happening over there, you will find them mentioned in Revelation. Read towards the end. That's where you'll hear about those. And it says explicitly that these people say they are those people, but they are not. And I think that's who we're dealing with, residing in the land here today. Okay? And so that's why it's a big topic. That's why it's a big topic, because for anybody coming into the truth and understanding that you are actually the chosen, anybody who accepts Yeshua, the Messiah, Jesus, the Christ, as their Savior, as the Mashiach, the one who has come and died for the sins of the world, anybody who accepts him and enters into that covenant with his Father through him, you are the chosen. And you've been brought in through the family, which is Israel, the people of God, which is Israel, the body, the ecclesia in the Greek. Yeah, it's not the church, okay? That's an interpretation of it, a transliteration. What it is ecclesia, the body of believers, the congregation, those who make up the body of believers, the ecclesia. It's those who are in covenant with the Father. It is those who have entered into the house of Israel. And you are grafted in. You are grafted in, back into the tree. And there is the Jews. You know, the actual cultural Jews. The flesh and blood Jews. There is those. But they're just one tribe of 12. Because the 12 tribes of Israel were split up into two kingdoms, the northern and southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom consisted of Benjamin and Judah. And those two tribes assimilated into the Jews. And they made up the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was sent out into the diaspora. And they are scattered all over the world. You could be like physically flesh and blood Israel, one of the other tribes of Israel. That's the reality that's found in that book. But even if you aren't, it doesn't matter. And that's the whole point and the beauty of what Yeshua did. Because it's through belief in him that you become part of that family anyway. It doesn't matter about your genetics. And it never did. If you look back even in the Torah, you will see that even the foreigners who came in with the Israelites of that time, they were brought in and made part of God's people. They were foreigners and they assimilated into Israel by keeping the covenant as well. And yes, there were physical attributes to keeping the covenant. You had to keep the Torah. These are God's instructions. And so if they did, they were part of Israel. You see it all through the Old Testament. People were assimilating into the tribes of Israel the entire book. And so that's the truth. And so that's a very disturbing thing here that's going on. Because what's ultimately happening is the truth is being suppressed through all of this stuff that's happening on the world stage right now. Because there's new laws being written in as we speak about anti-Semitism and talking about, whoever it actually is that's over there in the land in these type of topics. It's a huge deal, this topic, I'm telling you. Because it does, whether you know it or not, it ties into that book and it ties in to how we all fit and play a part in it and how this ultimately pans out in the end. And so for everybody thinking this whole thing around Charlie Kirk and Shabbat Shalom is a big joke, I can't say for sure because I didn't know the guy. But what I do submit to you here today is there is a possibility that he was coming into a deeper knowledge of the truth. And that these type of things, the Sabbath, they don't belong to the Jews, okay? Belong to God's people, all of us. And so you can see how this works here. And it's a dangerous, dangerous thing. Anyway, we will cover more about this because it's my mission. This is the path I've been on for a long time. This is what God opened my eyes to, 17 years ago now. And I could never go back to mainstream Christianity knowing what I know now. I've seen the problems with it. And I know this to be the truth. And so you could never convince me otherwise at this point. I know this to be the truth. And so, yeah, I just think it's very interesting, and I think that we need to be talking about it, and we need to be keeping this alive and seeing how this whole thing and how our faith, the actual truth and roots of our faith, how it ties into current events and the things that are unfolding and happening on the world stage right now. Better be paying attention. Anyway, that's all I got for this one. We will talk again soon, I promise. Please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear from you. Please comment. Anyway, this is Thumper, and as always, sorry about your toes if we stepped on them. Till the next one, we're out.